immigration, never ever let yourself fall out of status. You know, sometimes people do it because they don't understand the ramifications there. You know, like I have a client now who had OPT and he applied for an H-1B and the H-1B was denied because, it's a long story, but the H-1B was denied. And so he, in November, and he didn't understand this enough about the significance of that. So what he does is he applies to go to graduate school, and he puts all his mental effort into that application process and getting in, and he gets in. But then he, you know, the officer of the school tells him, yeah, but you've been out of status since November. You know, you have to fix this. So then he comes to me, and fixing it is you know, it's not certain that we can fix it. So never ever overstay a visa or let yourself get out of status. Okay. The one other thing about supporting documentation that I want to point out is because you mentioned this about if you have a foreign degree, you're going to have to prove to CIS that it's the equivalent of a U.S. degree. So you have to get a well, I'll get a little more detail on this. So what you normally do is get what's called the credentials evaluation, and there's businesses out there like WES, I think it's World Educational Services, that can get a credentials evaluation, can do this. It costs, I think, about $100, and they look at your stuff, and they tell CIS, they render an opinion as to whether it's the equivalent of a U.S. degree. Now, if you have an undergraduate, a BA from a foreign country, but you have a U.S. PhD, then it's not worth spending the money on this because obviously it must be the equivalent of a BA if a U.S. academic institution accepted you and let you start a course of study. If you're using that 3-for-1 rule, you're going to need evidence of the experience, which is going to be very specific letters from past employers talking about the job and what it entailed.
Excuse me, what is the 3-for-1 rule?
Okay, the 3-for-1 rule is if you don't have a BA, like somebody who has, for example, an associate's degree, 2-year, but they've been working at a job that usually requires a BA for a long time, they can substitute those 2 years of experience that they're missing. If each year that they need to substitute is substituted by 3 years of work experience. Right? And it's a hard case. You know, I don't see a lot of those. It's actually, you have a better chance actually going and getting the BA, but it is out there. Okay. The LCA, Labor Conditions Application, this is the part I was saying employers are most upset about. And it's not so bad. It's just where the employer is sort of making promises, attestations they call it, that they're going to be, what they're going to be paying, that they are in fact going to be paying the prevailing wage, how many people they're going to be hiring, and really an attorney does it. But just so you know that this is part of the process. Okay, I'm not going to go into a lot of this, but in years, and we'll see how this year is, but in years when there's not enough H-1Bs, it becomes a big issue of, well, now what? You know, if you're one of those stack, particularly that stack that is just rejected, just immediately sent back to the attorney or the employer, then people are like, okay, so now what do I do? And there are some options. You know, I'm not going to go through all of them in detail, but you might fit into something else if you can't get an H-1B. And the ones that I see most commonly are the TN visas, which are just like H-1Bs, but you have to be Canadian or Mexican. And TN it refers to the NAFTA treaty. And TNs are provided for in there. And another one that I see a lot of is O visas. And these are aliens of outstanding ability. And a lot of times, scientists with publications are aliens of outstanding ability. So if you're one of those people and say you get a job for a pharmaceutical company, doing research, that's the private sector, and you can't get an H-1B, there's a good chance that you could get an O visa.
Is the O visa dual intent of the H-1 visa?
Well, it's supposed to be. Okay, and that's you know, immigration changes on almost a daily basis.
Oh.
All right, and that has always been our intent, or our understanding, that O is dual intent. That's what we've always told clients. About 2 weeks ago, they turned away O visas, people with O visas at the airport. They found them inadmissible because they had a green card claim, and that shouldn't be. So, yeah, the answer is they're supposed to be.
Okay.
All right. You know, there was quite a, what's the word for it? don't know if any of you read immigration type blogs, but there was quite a controversy over the last, I'd say, month or so, because people were coming into the United States, and this was happening at Newark International Airport. They were coming in from India, and they had H-1Bs, and they were IT people. So a lot of IT people come in and they work for the employer as a consultant, but then they go out to different projects to actually do the work. And now these people have already been approved for the H-1B here in the United States. They've been to the consulate abroad and they've been approved again. And then they were coming in, and at the port of entry, they were being asked questions about, what are you going to be doing, and who exactly is going to be the employer. And the foreign national would try to explain this business about how they have an employer, but they'll be out, working as a consultant. And the officer at the border has been turning them away and sending them home. So there was a big controversy because people felt, or the Indian community felt, that it was only Indian nationals that were being turned away like this. So, it's one of those things that you never know what's going to happen. And, immigration lawyers are part of this group called American Immigration Lawyers Association, and they have meetings with the people at Newark Airport, and they deny that there's any kind of, racial thing going on. They say, well, no, 4 flights from India come in a day, and that's where you have most of your H-1Bs, so that's why this is happening. But that's, something different is going on constantly. Okay, I'm going to only mention this because it's become less of an issue of late, but it used to be that people would have an OPT that expired in May, and then if they got the H-1B, it wasn't going to start until October, so now there's a gap between May and October. And this would cause lawyers to be like, struggling to figure out how we're going to keep somebody here if they don't want to go home and take a vacation. And it's become a little bit easier now because if you have OPT and you apply for an H-1B, the OPT is automatically extended until October 1st or until you get a denial. So if you don't get the H-1B, then the OPT ends. But if you do, it goes straight through to October, and you can continue to work until you have the H-1B. Okay. Now I'm going to start to talk about green cards.
What if the OPT starts in February and then you file in April?
It doesn't matter when.
But
Yeah.
with those 2-3 months that are in between February and April, what will the person will do? Because you are filing H-1B.
Oh, I
in
see
April
what you mean.
first.
Then you're going to have to figure out something. That's when it becomes, that's when it becomes an issue. Some people, if you're not working, you can change tourist status and hang out. You can go home for a while. Yeah, but that's what.
But the person has to be here because he's filing for H-1B.
Well, you can file for H-1B though from abroad. I mean, that's a possibility. You can apply at the embassy, which if you know you're going to be home is what you have to do. Because if you apply here and then you go home, you have invalidated what you applied for here. So this is all, you have to do a lot of planning.
So there are no special rules for that?
No, because the concept is that you already have it when you apply. You're talking about a gap that started before you applied, so that you're going to have to figure something out. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about green cards. All right, I'm going to just give you some general things that apply no matter how you go about getting it. And then I'm going to talk about the ways that people go about getting it. And all right, so let me start with what the requirements are. The first thing is that the job has to be full-time. You can't get a green card based on a part-time job. All right. In most cases, you have to get a Department of Labor certification. And that's a real nuisance. And again, the Department of Labor is there, in their opinion, to protect American labor. So they slow down the process and, they don't make it easy. And in an economy with almost 10% unemployment, they make it very difficult. So, that it's really, kind of a roadblock. And when you hear, and what it is that the way they, what a Department of Labor certification is when the employer has to show that they couldn't find minimally qualified U.S. workers to do the job. And then they have to prove to the Department of Labor that that's the case, that they recruited for the job and they couldn't find people. And they have to recruit in the way that the Department of Labor tells them